Greek proverb, I am because we are, is the foundation of the ACBN YouTube channel. Tap in for all of our remarkable content and ecosystem mobilization through the phenomenal practitioners and thought leaders we engage on this channel. In the words of Adrienne Marie Brown, things are not getting worse, they are getting uncovered. We must hold each other tight to pull back the veil. Get ready for another amazing ACBN-powered interview.
So welcome again, and please introduce yourself briefly to our listeners and viewers.
Hi, everyone. I'm Heather. I am a consultant working in the nonprofit space, working with a lot of nonprofit-based social enterprise. And I've worked in this sector, in and around this sector for most of my career.
Thank you. So when you consider the potential of social finance fund, what is the lens you're typically approaching from?
So this is sort of interesting for me. You know, when the fund was first sort of being proposed, I think was, sort of, if we go way, way back to the Social Finance Task Force, and they sort of recommended this fund. At the time I was working within a charity helping to develop social enterprise strategies. So I was really interested in, how might my organization be able to access financing to further some of the work we were looking to do. And then, when the fund in its current state was announced back in 2018, I had been working as a director at a credit union looking after the portfolio of business in the nonprofit and co-op sector. So I was really interested both in terms of how the credit union might partner with the social finance fund to access capital, particularly to be able to access capital that might be used as a de-risking tool, allowing us to do some of the loans that we currently weren't willing or able to do from a regulatory perspective. And I think today, I work as a consultant in the nonprofit space with a lot of nonprofit-based social enterprises, and they're really, again, interested in accessing capital to support their work. So I sort of see both sides of this, but I think that the key point for me, or the key lens, is that really it's about nonprofit-based social enterprise is probably my primary lens that I look at.
So where do you think the Social Finance Fund shows the most promise?
So I think that the fund can have a really significant impact around affordable housing, broader social purpose real estate, as well as environmental sector. Housing and social purpose real estate, it makes sense. These are like investments in real assets that lenders understand. People know how to do this kind of lending. It's mortgage lending. We know how to do it. We need it as a society. We desperately need this type of investment. So this would be a really good thing. The environmental sector is another area where I think the fund can play a really important role. We as a country, as we move forward with our Paris Agreement commitments, as we move forward towards net zero commitments, there's a need for significant investments in the coming years in environmental technologies. So, there are opportunities for new technologies, new service businesses that may be well suited for equity investments as well as loan financing. But it's a space, it's technologies, it's markets that investors don't really understand. And so typically what we find is when people don't understand a market, they're less willing to invest. And so I think that the Social Finance Fund has the potential to really lay some important groundwork invest in an emerging industry. That's a really important one for Canada. So those are the places where I think it has the most potential.
Absolutely. So what are some of your concerns about the Social Finance Fund as you currently understand it?
My biggest concern is that I don't think the Social Finance Fund is going to do a good job of meeting the needs of the nonprofit sector and underserved communities. So the fund has made, since the very beginning, the fund has always been sold as something that was going to benefit nonprofit, marginalized communities. And unfortunately, I don't see where the structures are being put in place to ensure that that happens. You know, I think that there was some effort made through the investment readiness program, and, you know, full disclosure, I've been involved in several projects that were, you know, funded. My salary was funded through the IRP in recent years. But most of what I've seen being funded through that program is unlikely to move towards social financing for a variety of reasons. I think central to this, you know, if we go back and we look 10 years ago, you know, at how social enterprise was being sold. It was being sold as a solution to nonprofit organizations. And, you know, while it can be a solution, it really isn't the holy grail it was held up to be. You know, so many organizations have this idea that social enterprise will not only pay for itself, but it will bring in profits to support other activities within the organization. But in practice, particularly once full cost allocations have taken place to look at what the true overhead and management costs are, this is rarely the case. And you know what, and I'm not sure, I don't think we should be surprised by this, and I'm not sure why we expected anything different. You know, if we look at most small businesses and medium-sized businesses, they provide the people who work for them with a living. They're not providing a tremendous amount of profit. So why would we expect a business that's saddled with the additional burdens of a social enterprise, some of those social deliverables that we look at, why would we expect that they would be able to outperform most small businesses? You know, it doesn't make sense. You know, as I said in the intro, I do spend a lot of time with organizations supporting them on social enterprise strategies. And I do firmly believe that social enterprise and earned income strategies play a really important role for nonprofits. They can be a pillar of strength for an organization, but they really shouldn't be relied on to fund other activities. And I think that as a result, we're going to see that social enterprises, when they're housed within a nonprofit, may not actually be something that lenders are excited about, because they're uncomfortable with the debt coverage being provided because there are lower margins. And that's just the reality. And I think social finance, in some ways, is being positioned much the same way as social enterprise. It's being positioned as, we won't need philanthropy anymore, you know, similar to social enterprise. We're going to private sector our way out of this. We're going to have market solutions. But the reality is that while social finance, you know, can be a really important tool, for the most part, it's not the solution. And a lot of organizations are still going to remain very dependent on philanthropic capital. I think when we talk about the potential of the Social Finance Fund to impact historically underserved communities, I have similar concerns. You know, when I was at the credit union, I had the incredible opportunity to learn from Susan Henry, who's definitely one of the leaders in microfinance in Canada. And she really taught me the importance of both trust and specialized and localized approaches. And, we don't know yet who the intermediaries are going to be for the social finance fund or how they'll be structured. But if this isn't done in a really deliberate way where dollars ends up in the hands of community loan funds or specialized lenders, it's not going to meet the needs of marginalized communities, because it's just not going to be the right fit. And I'm not seeing the structures that I would expect to see that happen. So that concerns me at this point.
So are there any potential unintended consequences of the social finance fund that you think need to be addressed?
I think the thing that concerns me most, and I think we just touched on this a little bit, but is how the nonprofit and historically underserved communities will be perceived if the fund doesn't reach them effectively. I think particularly with the nonprofit sector, I'm concerned by a narrative that I feel is being built that seems to put the blame for a lack of investment readiness in the hands of the nonprofits, as opposed to asking the question of whether social finance has been designed in a way that responds to the needs of nonprofits. So while there were grant dollars invested through the investment readiness program to get organizations, ready for investment, a lot of those investments, at least the ones I'm familiar with, were for very early stage and nowhere near ready for investment. Many other funded projects will never really likely to produce the revenues needed to support loan financing. And there really hasn't been strong reporting on the IRP yet. There has been some, but it doesn't really show how far the needle was really moved, what types of financing projects might be looking for when they anticipate potentially moving forward with the financing ask. This information was collected as part of reporting, so it should be available, but the reporting that's been published at this point or made available to the public is really limited to the type of organization, what sustainable development goals were impacted, and then a map with the location of where they were and the community served. And so I'm really sort of wondering, okay, so how effective was IRP at its sort of stated purpose? I think combined with this, and perhaps even more concerning, several years ago, there was a report put out by Imagine Canada titled, "Are Charities Ready for Social Finance?" And, I don't think it would be a surprise to anybody who knows the sector that report concluded that no. And I just don't know why the question wasn't, is social finance designed for charities? I mean, I think the answer would have again be no. But that's not what was asked. And I think, if the sector and if Black and Brown and other historically underserved communities don't get what they need from the social finance fund, whose fault is it? And I think that I'm just concerned about how things are being set up in terms of what the answer is going to be or how that narrative is going to be built out. There's a lot of money that's going into this, and is it being done in a way that's going to meet these specific needs? And I'm not sure it is.
So what do you think we need to be doing? Do you have a call to action?
I think there's a couple things. And I mean, I think that the key thing right now is that while the wholesalers have been announced, we don't know who the intermediaries are. And I think the bottom line is the intermediaries are who's going to make or break this. right? And we need to make sure that the intermediaries are supported to do what they need to do, and that we have the correct intermediaries in place. So I think there's a couple things that need to happen. One, I think there needs to be a commitment to the collection of disaggregated data so that we can actually assess what's really happening. Who's accessing the money? Where is it going? For what purpose? We need to understand that, right? We also need for there to be clear impact measurement targets that go beyond leverage. So, there's this 2-to-1 goal of leverage and getting money out the door. So that's really looking at the supply side of the equation. But we need to look at the demand side of the equation. We need to look at how many requests are coming in, from who, and how many of those loan requests are actually being funded. And when they're being declined, why are they being declined? And what does that look like, right? And so I think we need to build this in a way that we're learning and we're building on that intelligence. Finally, I think we need to be able to continue to support programs like IRP and other programs that support organizations that are helping to build capacity
Right.
within the nonprofit sector, within historically underserved communities, so that individuals are ready to be able to access financing. And, that needs to be subsidized. That is non-repayable, grant dollars that needs to do that. And I think on the other piece of this is we need specialized financing programs. You can't lend to, the biggest challenge with lending to nonprofits is, and mortgages to nonprofit is they don't have the down payment, or they don't have, they don't meet sort of traditional criteria of lending. The loans need to be de-risked. They need to have like a loan loss pool or a guarantee fund or something like that. Like that needs to be there. For historically underserved communities, often the loan amounts are really small. It costs a lot of money to do that kind of lending. And so traditionally that kind of lending is done based on, oh, you own a house, okay, you can take out a line of credit against your house or something like that. That's very easy for a lender to do. But if the borrower doesn't have access to that kind of credit, you have to do a different kind of lending. You have to be more engaged and involved, and that costs money. And so those organizations need an operating subsidy in order to be able to do that work. And so I think we have to be speaking out. We have to be, demanding that this fund that in theory is supposed to support underserved communities, is supposed to support the nonprofit community, that it is going to do that. And if the focus is going to be on housing, or if that's fine, make that statement, clarify that, so that people aren't running in circles trying to access something that they're not going to be able to access, right? And I think that's this is the clarity that's kind of needed. And, it's taken a long time to get to a place where we have wholesalers. I don't know how long it's going to take till we get to a place where we've got intermediaries in place and that money is actually flowing to the community. But, anybody, frankly, who was funded by IRP in the first year of IRP, if they were really loan ready, they've found another source to loan them the money. It's so this has taken a really long time to roll out. I think if we're going to take the time, that kind of time to roll it out, let's take the time to do it properly. Let's have the right conversations, and let's make sure that these commitments to these key deliverables that have sort of been promised from the beginning are included as real measures in the work that's being done.
Absolutely. Thank you for your insight and your time and your remarkable leadership, Heather. As we close this interview, I'd like to close it the same way we began it, by acknowledging the original stewards of the various lands that we're on. And we also acknowledge our ancestors. We acknowledge all those who toiled without compassion or compensation. And we acknowledge the elders and community